Good evening. We begin tonight with another example of using new technology in forensics to solve cases. A cigarette butt in.
Today we're here to announce that we have arrested Brian Leigh Dripps for the murder and rape of Angie Dodge.
I'd just like to say that I'm sorry.
In the world of criminal investigation, every case begins with a life, a person whose story deserves to be remembered. This channel is dedicated to examining the investigative methods used to uncover the truth behind real crimes while keeping the focus where it belongs, on the victims and the pursuit of justice. Through careful analysis of evidence, forensic science, and detective work, we explore how investigators piece together clues, reconstruct events, and ultimately bring answers to families and communities. This is not a channel about glorifying criminals. It is a channel about understanding investigations and honoring the lives behind the cases. Welcome to The Investigation, and welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a deep dive that really tests the limits of what we think we know about the justice system.
Exactly, because today we are looking at a story that represents, both the absolute best and the absolute worst of criminal justice. We're looking at the tragic 1996 murder of an 18-year-old named Angie Dodge in Idaho Falls.
Right, and the subsequent wrongful conviction of a young man named Chris Tapp.
And then ultimately, the groundbreaking, decades-long pursuit of the truth using genetic genealogy.
It's an incredibly complex narrative. I mean, we are tracing a fundamental shift in how investigations actually work.
We have a massive stack of sources for you today to help us understand all of this. We're pulling from legal documents from the state of Idaho, incredibly detailed investigative reporting from CBS News and East Idaho News.
Yeah, and we also have scientific summaries from Promega and comprehensive case files from the Innocence Project.
And by synthesizing all these sources, the mission for this deep dive is to explore its central, baffling question. How did a completely pristine DNA sample fail to prevent a devastating miscarriage of justice?
Right, and how did revolutionary advancements in forensic science, driven entirely by a mother's unrelenting love, finally uncover the truth 23 years later?
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start where this story truly begins, and that is with Angie Dodge herself. She wasn't just a case file or, a true crime statistic.
No, absolutely not. She was an 18-year-old woman, highly intelligent, and honors graduate from Idaho Falls High School.
She was living in her very first apartment, really experiencing that first taste of real freedom.
She was fiercely independent. I mean, our sources detail how she loved the outdoors, she loved camping, and she spent a significant amount of her time tutoring young children in math and English.
She was really just starting her adult life in this tight-knit community where people, they largely still left their doors unlocked.
Yeah, it was a different time.
And there's this one detail from the reporting shared by her mother, Carol Dodge, that really grounds you in who Angie was. And it just breaks your heart.
Yeah, the night before.
Right, the night before the murder, Carol went to see Angie. And as they were talking, Angie rested her head on her mom's shoulder. They rocked back and forth, and Angie playfully said, "I still whittle, huh, Mommy?"
Oh, man.
It's this beautiful, tender moment of a teenager caught right on the threshold between seeking independence and, still needing her mother.
It's a devastating final memory to hold on to, because in the early hours of June 13th, 1996, that life was stolen.
Yeah.
Angie was brutally raped and murdered in her apartment. The autopsy revealed she was stabbed 14 times. She fought incredibly hard for her life. It was a chaotic, bloody scene.
But from a purely forensic standpoint, that chaos offered investigators what should have been an incredibly strong starting point.
Exactly, because the perpetrator left behind a biological calling card, semen and hair.
Right.
And from that evidence, investigators extracted a pristine DNA profile. As the renowned DNA expert Greg Hampikian noted in the case files, this was a complete identification.
Meaning it was unambiguous.
Totally. It belonged to one single man, to the absolute exclusion of everyone else on the planet.
But wait, I have to pause here.
Yeah?
If they had a perfect DNA sample in 1996, why didn't they just catch the guy? I mean, if you have this perfect biological blueprint, how does this turn into a decades-long cold case? It's like having a perfect, crystal clear fingerprint left on a glass. It was utterly useless if that person has never been fingerprinted before. It's a key without a lock.
That is the perfect analogy for what happened here. The DNA just didn't match anyone in the local system.
Wow.
And later, when it was uploaded to the national database, CODIS, it didn't match anyone there either. The police swabbed dozens of local men, interviewed everyone Angie knew, mapped out her entire social circle, and still nothing. The lock was nowhere to be found.
So because the objective science hit a dead end, the police pivoted. And this is where the investigation fractures, right?
Yes, terribly. They developed a theory that maybe there were multiple attackers. Maybe the guy who left the DNA wasn't acting alone.
And that theory sent them down a deeply psychological and ultimately dangerous path.
It led them straight to a 20-year-old high school dropout named Chris Tapp. Now, Tapp was part of a group of kids who hung out by the Snake River, and he was an acquaintance of Angie's.
But the primary reason he was brought in for questioning wasn't evidence at all. It was association.
Right. One of his friends, a man named Ben, was arrested for a similar crime in neighboring Nevada.
And they tested Chris Tapp's DNA right away, didn't they?
They did, and it was not a match to the crime scene. They tested Ben's DNA, too. Also not a match.
But instead of clearing Chris Tapp and moving on, the police completely zeroed in on him. They interrogated him for over 25 hours, spread out across 23 days.
25 hours of interrogation for a 20-year-old kid. And largely without a lawyer present to advocate for him.
Yeah, and over the course of those 23 days, Tapp's story changed 6 different times.
Which is a massive red flag for a false confession.
I have to stop you there, because watching those tapes, which were later analyzed by false confession experts, is just mind-boggling. I sit here thinking, like most of you listening probably do, that I would never, ever confess to a brutal murder I didn't commit.
Right. Most people assume that.
So how does a police interrogation actually break a human brain down to the point where they invent memories?
Well, it's a process of systematic psychological dismantling. The detectives used a technique centered around the polygraph machine.
Okay.
Now, we know polygraphs are generally inadmissible in court because they aren't scientifically reliable for detecting deception. They just measure stress.
Right, your heart rate, sweating, things like that.
Exactly. But detectives in this case used the polygraph room for what retired Judge Michael Heavy accurately described as a psychological rubber hose.
A psychological rubber hose. Explain how that works in practice.
So they hook you up to the machine and they tell you that the machine is infallible. The machine knows you were there. When Tapp denied it, they told him he was failing.
They actually threatened him with the gas chamber, didn't they?
They did, but here's the truly insidious part. They offered him a psychological escape hatch. They told him, you probably blocked out the memory of the murder because it was so traumatic.
Wow. So they are feeding him an excuse.
They essentially gaslit this kid into believing that his own subconscious was hiding his guilt from him. They convinced him his only way to avoid execution was to confess to holding Angie down while someone else, the mysterious DNA donor, actually killed her.
And during this process, the police are actively feeding him the narrative. They're telling him what Angie was wearing, they're describing the layout of the stair, so when he finally repeats it back to them, it sounds like he has insider knowledge.
Yes, exactly.
And eventually he breaks, he confesses. And based almost entirely on that coerced confession, Chris Tapp is convicted in 1998 and sentenced to 30 years to life in prison.
What's fascinating here is the psychology of the courtroom and why this happens so frequently. Jurors place an overwhelming amount of weight on confessions.
Right.
Like you said earlier, from the outside, we think, I would never confess to a crime I didn't commit. So when a jury hears a defendant say, I did it on tape, that often completely overrides logic.
It overrides the fact that his DNA wasn't in the room.
Right. It overrides the fact that his story changed 6 times and the complete lack of physical evidence tying him to the crime.
And so Chris Tapp sits in a maximum security prison cell for 7,353 days.
It's tragic.
But while his life is seemingly over, something incredible is happening on the outside. Angie's mother, Carol Dodge, who initially wanted the death penalty for Tapp, starts doing her own relentless research.
She really dug in.
She studies the science. She sits down and watches all those interrogation tapes. And she comes to a staggering, horrifying conclusion. The police got the wrong guy. Chris Tapp is innocent.
It is a remarkable, heartbreaking pivot. Carol Dodge realizes her daughter's true killer is still out there, and she becomes one of Chris Tapp's fiercest advocates.
Which is just incredible strength.
It really is. And her pursuit of the actual killer pushes investigators into a completely new, highly experimental frontier of forensic science, familial DNA.
Which brings us back to that terrifying scenario. Imagine your dad takes a DNA test to build a family tree, and suddenly you're a murder suspect.
Yeah, the privacy implications are massive.
It's 2014. the police decide to search a public genealogical database. This was a database originally built by a church genealogy project, the Sorensen Molecular Genealogy Foundation, which had eventually been bought by Ancestry.com.
Exactly. And the police were looking specifically at the Y chromosome. Now, to understand this, think of the Y chromosome like a family surname. It is passed down almost entirely unchanged from father to son, generation after generation.
Right.
When they ran the crime scene DNA against this public database, they got a hit. It was a 34 out of 35 allele match.
Let me jump in. For those of us who aren't geneticists, what is an allele and why does 34 out of 35 matter?
Sure. If a Y chromosome is the family surname, alleles are like the specific letters that spell out that name. Finding a 34 out of 35 letter match is an incredibly strong signal. It means you have undoubtedly found the right family tree.
Okay, that makes sense.
And this specific match pointed directly to a man named Michael Usry Sr., who had submitted his DNA for that church project years earlier just to learn about his heritage.
But the police looked at the timeline and knew the older man couldn't have done it. So they looked down the family tree to his son, Michael Usry Jr.
Yeah.
And on paper, for a detective suffering from confirmation bias, the son looked like a literal movie villain. He was an independent filmmaker living in New Orleans who made short films about brutal murders, so-called murderabilia.
And he had actually traveled through Idaho Falls right around the time of the murder.
So the police orchestrate a high-stakes stakeout. They ambush Michael Usry Jr. in New Orleans, bring him in, and execute a warrant for a cheek swab.
You can only imagine the utter terror of being a completely innocent person, going about your day and suddenly being accused of a horrific cold case murder from decades ago because of your father's hobby.
It's chilling. It's like leaving a breadcrumb trail for your family history, only for the police to use it to hunt you down.
Ultimately, that cheek swab cleared him. They tested his autosomal DNA, which is the full genetic picture inherited from both parents, not just the male line, and it did not match the crime scene. He was completely 100% innocent.
But this one incident ignited a massive nationwide debate about privacy rights.
Yeah.
Ancestry.com actually took that database offline to protect its users.
They did. It forced law enforcement and society to really reckon with the ethical boundaries of searching public genetic repositories.
And for the Angie Dodge investigation, it was a massive failure. The Y chromosome search was a bust because it only tracks the male line, which can fracture through adoptions or unrecorded paternity.
Right. To cast a wider net and actually find the killer, they needed that full genetic picture. But there was a massive roadblock. The crime scene sample was incredibly degraded.
Highly degraded. And this brings us to the real turning point of this deep dive. Enter C.C. Moore, a renowned genetic genealogist working with Parabon Nanolabs.
Yeah, she's brilliant.
But she was initially hesitant to even take the case because the sample they had was in terrible shape. Our sources state it only had a 61.2% call rate, meaning it was missing about 329,000 SNPs.
Right. And to explain what that means in plain English, SNP stands for single nucleotide polymorphism.
Okay.
Imagine your DNA is a massive, multi-volume encyclopedia of who you are. SNP is just a single letter on a single page of that encyclopedia.
That's a great visual.
Thanks. So if you are missing 329,000 letters, the sentences stop making sense. In the scientific community, a sample that degraded is generally considered completely unusable for genetic genealogy. You just don't have enough data to build a reliable profile.
But Carol Dodge is relentless. She literally begs C.C. Moore to try anyway. So Moore takes this fragmented, broken profile and uploads it to a public database called GEDmatch. And she does something absolutely mind-bending. Usually if you use a genealogy site, you build your family tree backward, right? You look for your parents, then your grandparents, tracing your roots back in time.
Right, the traditional way.
But C.C. Moore couldn't do that, so she used reverse genealogy.
Exactly. Using the fragmented data she had, she identified distant common ancestors from the mid-1800s, a couple named Joseph Lathram and Orlena Gaither, and another line tracing back to a man named Martin Ussery.
Wow.
From those ancestors in the 19th century, she started building the family tree forward in time.
I love the visual for this. Standard genealogy is like standing at the tip of a tree branch and tracing it all the way down to the trunk. What C.C. Moore did was find the trunk in the 1800s and then painstakingly climb up every single branch looking for the one leaf that happened to blow into Idaho Falls in 1996.
That's exactly how it works. She is sifting through census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, newspaper archives, and public family trees.
All by hand, basically.
Yeah. Branch by branch, generation by generation, she eliminates lines that moved to other states or didn't have male children. And through sheer analytical rigor, she whittles the entire population of the country down to just 6 men.
6 men. The police immediately focus on one of those 6 who happen to live nearby in Twin Falls, Idaho. They secretly follow him, wait for him to spit out a wad of chewing tobacco, they bag it, and they test it.
And it's a negative, it's not him.
Which must have been gut-wrenching.
At this point, the investigators are absolutely devastated. They think they've hit another dead end, that the degraded DNA finally failed them.
But Cece Moore doesn't give up. She keeps digging into the historical records, and she uncovers a 7th ghost suspect.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where raw data synthesis meets sheer, stubborn human persistence.
Yeah.
Moore found a highly obscure obituary in a small local library. This obituary revealed a woman who had briefly married into the suspect's family line. The marriage ended in divorce before they had kids, so Moore had initially discounted that entire branch. Right, because there were no offspring.
Exactly. But this obituary listed a son born after the divorce, before her second marriage. This son took his new stepfather's last name. He carried the killer's DNA line, but his name was entirely different. His name was Brian Dripps.
A 7th suspect. And when police looked up Brian Dripps, they found a piece of information that must have made their blood run cold. In 1996, Brian Dripps lived at 459 I Street in Idaho Falls. Angie Dodge lived at 444 I Street.
He lived directly across the street from her.
Unbelievable.
In fact, looking back at the original case files, the police had actually knocked on his door just 5 days after the murder as part of a routine neighborhood canvass.
You are kidding me.
Nope. He answered, denied knowing anything, and they never asked for his DNA. He packed up and moved out of town just a few weeks later.
So now we are in 2019. It is 23 years after the murder. Investigators track Brian Dripps to Caldwell, Idaho. They know they have their ghost suspect, but they need his actual DNA to prove he's the guy.
Right. Undercover detectives stake him out for 20 straight hours. Finally, he tosses a cigarette butt out of his car window. A detective literally risks oncoming traffic to run out into the street and grab it.
They rush that cigarette butt to the lab. And it is a 100% positive match. The semen, the hair from the crime scene, the pristine evidence from 1996, it all belonged to Brian Dripps.
So they bring him in for questioning. He's nervous. His hands are visibly shaking. When they finally look at him and tell him they have his DNA from Angie's apartment, he breaks.
He does. He confesses to the crime. He tells them he was heavily impaired by drugs and alcohol, that he intended to rape Angie, not kill her.
And crucially, the detail that changes everything. He states that he acted entirely alone. He didn't even know who Chris Tapp was.
Dripps pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. But his confession, backed by the undeniable DNA evidence, finally paved the way to fix the mistake made 2 decades earlier. On July 17, 2019, Chris Tapp's murder conviction was fully vacated. The judge officially cleared him of all charges. It is widely recognized in the forensic community as the very first time genetic genealogy was used to exonerate a wrongfully convicted person.
So what does this all mean? I mean, if you put yourself in Chris Tapp's shoes for a second, the emotional whiplash is almost impossible to comprehend. You spent over 2 decades in a cage for a crime you didn't commit, simply because you cracked under psychological torture.
It's horrifying.
In 2021, utilizing the newly passed Idaho Wrongful Conviction Act, the state paid Tapp $1,248,980.58.
Wow.
They calculated that at exactly $169.86 for every single one of the 7,353 days he was locked up. Later, the city of Idaho Falls agreed to an $11.7 million settlement.
And Tapp used his freedom and that settlement to become a passionate, vocal advocate for the wrongfully convicted. He actively helped push for compensation laws to ensure others wouldn't be left with nothing after being exonerated by the state.
He got married. He started to build the life that had been stolen from him.
But the epilogue to this story is just, well, it's a gut punch.
It really is. In October 2023, at the age of 47, Chris Tapp died. He was rushed to the hospital after an altercation in a Las Vegas hotel room. The coroner ruled his death a homicide.
Yeah, a former professional wrestler was eventually charged with his murder. It is a profoundly bitter, deeply unfair end for a man who fought so incredibly hard for so long just to have his life back.
It is a devastating tragedy. And while the resolution of the Angie Dodge case closed two incredibly painful chapters, bringing a true killer to justice and freeing a completely innocent man, it fundamentally altered the landscape of forensic science.
Absolutely. It changed how we view our own genetic data.
And that brings us to the tools that actually solved this puzzle and the societal fallout that followed.
Right. Following the explosive use of genetic genealogy in cases exactly like this one, GED Match, the public database CC Moore used to find Brian Dripps, actually changed its terms of service.
Oh, so?
Users now have to explicitly opt in to allow law enforcement to search their genetic profiles for criminal investigations. This single policy shift drastically reduced the pool of available data for police, shrinking it from millions of profiles to a fraction of that.
It leaves us with the ultimate double-edged sword, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
We now possess the technological capability to solve almost any cold case. We have the power to free the wrongfully convicted, to hold violent offenders accountable decades after the fact, and to give grieving families the answers they deserve.
Yeah, the answers they've waited years for.
But doing so requires us to sacrifice a piece of our collective genetic privacy. So it leaves you with a deeply personal question to ponder.
Right.
If it were your data, would you explicitly opt in to help catch a killer, knowing that by doing so you might inadvertently make your own family members suspects?
That is a heavy question, and one we are going to be wrestling with as a society for a very long time. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Angie Dodge case. We'll be back next time to explore another fascinating story from the stacks. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and take care of yourselves.